They thought the uniform was just a costume, something I wore to play soldier while real warriors did the work. My father's laughter cut deepest, echoing through our dining room like shrapnel. My brother called me Captain Clipboard between bites of steak, and Mother just smiled that pitying smile she'd perfected over 32 years. I stayed silent that night, fingers tracing the edge of my dress blues, counting the minutes until my unit would walk through those French doors. They didn't know silence could be a weapon. They didn't know who I really was. They were about to learn. My name is Ava Mitchell, and I've killed men in 3 different time zones while my family thought I was filing paperwork. The salt air of Clearwater, North Carolina, hit me the moment I stepped out of the rental car. Same smell as always, brine and privilege, old money and older prejudices. The Mitchell family estate sat on the bluff like it had for 60 years, white columns gleaming against the October sunset. I'd been gone for a year this time. Afghanistan, then a classified operation in Eastern Europe that left 2 of my men wounded and 8 Americans alive who shouldn't have been. But none of that mattered tonight. Tonight was about Ryan's new fitness center. There she is. My mother, Diane, floated down the porch steps in her Carolina pearls and practiced smile. "Oh, darling, you look." Her eyes swept my dress uniform, searching for the right word. Official. Official. Like I was wearing a Halloween costume in November. "Mom." I accepted her air kiss, inhaling her signature gardenia perfume that probably cost more than a private's monthly salary. "Everyone's already here. Ryan's been telling us all about the expansion, 3,000 square feet. Can you imagine? And your father's old SEAL buddies came. They're so excited to see Ryan's setup." Of course they were. Ryan, the golden boy who'd washed out of basic training after 2 weeks, but somehow convinced everyone he'd have made it if his knee hadn't acted up. Ryan, who bench pressed his way through life while I crawled through actual trenches. The dining room hummed with conversation and bourbon. 8 people around the mahogany table that had hosted senators and admirals. My father, Robert Mitchell, held court at the head, his silver hair still military short, his voice booming some story about the good old days. Ryan sat to his right, the prince's position, his new money girlfriend draped over his arm like an accessory. "Look who finally made it," Ryan called out, already 3 drinks in by the flush on his face. "Little Ava in her big uniform, still playing soldier, sis." The laughter rippled around the table. Even Dad chuckled into his whiskey. "Something like that," I said, taking the only empty seat at the far end. "Of course." The children's table position, even at 32. "You should see the new gym," Ryan continued, his voice taking that tone I knew so well, the one that needed everyone to know how important he was. "State-of-the-art equipment. We're getting a contract with the police academy. Real training for real warriors. You know, real warriors," I repeated, unfolding my napkin. The irony tasted like copper pennies. Dad raised his glass. To Ryan, carrying on the Mitchell tradition of strength. Everyone drank. I lifted my water glass, letting the ice clink against my teeth. "So, Ava," one of Dad's friends, Coleman, I think leaned forward. "Still doing that, what was it? Administrative work. Logistics," my mother supplied helpfully. "She does logistics. I coordinate operations," I said. Right. Desk job. Important stuff. I'm sure. Someone's got to push the papers while the real operators do the work." Coleman winked at Ryan. "No offense. Sweetheart. Sweetheart." I'd heard a man call me that once in Kandahar. He'd been trying to buy information about our patrol routes. I'd broken his wrist in 3 places. "None taken," I said, cutting into my steak. The knife sliced through the meat like it was butter, like it was skin. "You know," Ryan said, his voice getting louder the way it did when he needed more attention, "I've been thinking about offering some consulting to the military, teaching them some real-world applicable fitness. Not that classroom stuff, but actual strength training. The kind that matters when the bullets start flying." The bullets. I almost laughed. The closest Ryan had come to bullets was playing Call of Duty in his temperature-controlled game room. That's wonderful, honey, Mom cooed. Isn't that wonderful? Robert, the military could use more Mitchell influence. Dad agreed. God knows they've gotten soft lately. All this sensitivity training and inclusion nonsense. In my day. In your day. I interrupted, my voice steady as a rifle sight. Men died because they underestimated their enemies. Silence fell like a hammer. Dad's jaw tightened. What would you know about it? Everything, I wanted to say. I know the weight of a dead soldier. I know the sound a helicopter makes when it's taking fire. I know how to keep my hands steady while I'm covered in someone else's blood. Instead, I smiled. The kind of smile I'd learned in interrogation training. You're right. Dad. What would I know? The conversation resumed, flowing around me like I was a rock in a stream. They talked about Ryan's business plans, about Dad's golf handicap, about Mom's charity auction. Nobody asked about my year abroad. Nobody asked about the new ribbons on my chest or the way my hands had new scars. I sat there in my dress blues, the uniform they thought was a costume, and remembered why I'd invited my unit to come at 9. It was 8:45 now. 15 more minutes of playing the family disappointment. 15 more minutes before they learned that sometimes the smallest person at the table carries the biggest secrets. Ryan was mid-story about some CrossFit competition when I heard the distant rumble of vehicles. Military vehicles have a specific sound, a diesel growl that's different from civilian cars. I took a sip of water and waited. The uniform wasn't a costume, it was armor. And they were about to find out what it protected. The laughter had always been there, woven into the fabric of my childhood like a thread of barbed wire. I was 7 the first time I understood my place in the Mitchell hierarchy. Ryan had just turned 10, and Dad brought home matching baseball gloves, except Ryan's was a genuine Wilson A2000 and mine was pink plastic from the toy aisle. Boys play real sports, Dad had said, ruffling Ryan's hair. Girls cheer them on. I'd thrown that pink glove in the ocean that night. Watched it disappear into the black water while everyone slept. It was my first act of rebellion, silent and secret. There would be many more. By the time I was 15, the pattern was carved in stone. Ryan was the athlete, despite quitting every team after a few weeks. I ran cross-country, setting school records that nobody mentioned at dinner. Ryan was the leader, though he couldn't organize his own locker. I was student council president, but that was just a popularity contest, according to Dad. Ryan was strong. I was stubborn. Ryan was determined. I was difficult. The morning I told them I was joining the army, Mom had actually dropped her coffee cup. It shattered on the Italian marble, brown liquid spreading like blood. The military. Dad's voice had been ice and disbelief. Women don't belong in combat zones, he'd continued, not even looking at me, addressing the wall like it would agree with him. They're not built for it, physically, mentally. It's not about equality, it's about reality, Ryan had laughed. Come on, Ava, you'll wash out in a week. Remember when you tried to learn boxing? You cried the first time you got hit. I hadn't cried. My eyes had watered from a broken nose. But I hadn't cried. I'd finished that fight with blood streaming down my face and won on points. But Ryan remembered it differently, and in the Mitchell house, Ryan's version was always the truth. This is just another phase, Mom had said, already calling someone to clean up the coffee. Like when you wanted to be a detective or a pilot. You'll grow out of it. But I didn't grow out of it. I grew into it. Basic training was hell. But it was an honest hell. When Drill Sergeant Matthews screamed in my face, it wasn't because I was a woman, it was because my bunk wasn't tight enough. When I did push-ups until my arms shook, it wasn't punishment for being female, it was because everyone did push-ups until their arms shook. For the first time in my life, I was measured by the same standards as everyone else. I excelled. Not because I was trying to prove something to my family they'd already decided I'd fail, but because I'd finally found a place where effort equated to respect, where medals weren't given for having the right chromosomes, but for having the right skills. The letter came 4 years later. I'd just made sergeant stationed at Fort Bragg, When Mom forwarded it to me, Princeton University, addressed to Ryan Mitchell, acceptance into their business program. Inside, a handwritten note from the Dean of Admissions. Your father's recommendation carried significant weight. Ryan hadn't even applied. Dad had done it for him, pulled strings, called in favors from his Navy network. Meanwhile, I'd earned my associate degree through night classes between deployments, and nobody had ever mentioned it at Sunday dinner. That was the year I stopped going home for Christmas. The year after that, I was selected for special operations. The letter designation was classified, but the training was everything Dad had said women couldn't do. Survive, resist, escape, evade. I learned to fly helicopters under fire, to navigate by stars, to field dress wounds while under attack. I learned 17 ways to kill a man with my bare hands and how to smile at a checkpoint while calculating exit strategies. Mom sent me regular updates about Ryan's life. His business ventures funded by Dad. His new boat a gift for making it on his own. His engagement to a senator's daughter broken off when she caught him with her sister. Every email was a masterclass in selective blindness, praising achievements that weren't and ignoring service that was. Your brother is really making something of himself, she'd write, while I was sleeping in Afghan caves. Ryan's carrying on the Mitchell name with honor, Dad would add, while I carried wounded soldiers through firefights. They genuinely believed it. That was the worst part. It wasn't conscious cruelty, it was something worse. Complete inability to see me as anything other than Robert Mitchell's disappointing daughter. The one who chose to play dress-up in uniform instead of finding a husband and having babies like a proper Southern woman should. The last straw had been 18 months ago, right before my deployment. I'd come home for Dad's birthday, wearing my dress uniform because I was flying out that night. Ryan had spent the entire dinner talking about his new tactical training program for civilians, essentially teaching accountants to do burpees while wearing unnecessary amounts of camouflage. It's about warrior mentality, he'd said, 5 drinks deep and getting philosophical. Some people have it, some don't. It's genetic, really. Look at our family. Mitchell men have always been fighters. What about Mitchell women? I'd asked quietly. The table had gone silent. Then Ryan laughed, that bourbon-soaked chuckle that sounded exactly like Dad's. Mitchell women marry fighters, he'd said. It's the natural order. I'd left that night without saying goodbye. Flew straight to Afghanistan, where I led Operation Iron Tide 3 months later. 8 Americans saved, 2 Silver Stars earned, 1 bullet wound that barely missed my spine. And still, in every letter home, they called it Ava's Little Adventure. The folder was manila, unremarkable, the kind that held 1,000 classified documents in 1,000 classified locations. But when Lieutenant Colonel Harrison slid it across his desk at Fort Liberty 6 weeks ago, his hands had trembled slightly. Captain Mitchell, he'd said, his voice careful as a mine detector. There's something you need to see. Inside was a letter on Naval Reserve letterhead, dated 3 years prior. The signature at the bottom stopped my heart. Robert M. Mitchell, Commander retired. The subject line read, Re-recognition for Operation Iron Tide Rescue Team. My father's words were typed, formal, each sentence a masterpiece of military precision. I write to express my deepest gratitude for the successful extraction of 8 American servicemen from behind enemy lines. The officer who led this operation demonstrated exceptional courage and tactical brilliance. As a former SEAL and the father of one of the rescued men's commanding officers, I understand the magnitude of this achievement. I'd read it 3 times before the words sank in. Father knew. He'd known for 3 years. There's more, Harrison had said quietly. The second page was a recommendation form, the kind used for Bronze Stars and Silver Stars. The nominee name was blacked out, classified, but the description was clear. Female officer, extraordinary heroism under fire, saved 8 lives including indirect preservation of Mitchell family honor. The recommending officer's signature, Robert M. Mitchell. The status box, withdrawn. He pulled it. Harrison explained unnecessarily. 48 hours after submitting it. No reason given. I'd stared at that word withdrawn until it burned into my retinas. My own father had written my commendation, acknowledged my heroism, and then buried it. "Why are you showing me this?" I'd asked, though I already knew. "Because you deserve to know." Harrison's jaw had tightened. "And because I served under your father in the Gulf. He was a good officer, but he had one weakness: he couldn't stand being overshadowed, not by anyone, especially not by a woman," I finished. By his daughter. The investigation had taken me 2 weeks, calling in favors from intel officers who owed me. The truth was worse than simple prejudice. One of the 8 men I'd saved had been Marcus Wheeler, whose father, James, had served directly under Dad in SEAL Team 4. James Wheeler was now a senator, positioning himself for a presidential run. The story of his son's rescue was political gold, but only if the hero fit the narrative. A female captain didn't fit. A Mitchell woman saving Mitchell honor definitely didn't fit. So Dad had crafted a different story. The rescue became a team effort. My name disappeared from reports, replaced with coalition forces and tactical support elements. When pressed for details, the official line was classified for operational security. Ryan, meanwhile, had started his fitness empire right after the rescue, using Dad's connections. "My family's military legacy," he'd say in interviews, standing in front of photos of Dad in uniform. The Mitchell warrior tradition. The email trail I'd found went deeper. Dad had been in contact with 3 of the rescued men's families, all of them believing the story he'd crafted. One message to James Wheeler stood out: the rescue team was everything we'd expect from American Special Forces. Strong, decisive, masculine leadership. Your son was saved by the best of what American military tradition represents. No need to complicate the narrative with unnecessary details. Unnecessary details. That's what I was an unnecessary detail in my own story. The worst discovery came last. A transcript from a Naval Reserve reunion dinner. 2 years ago. Dad had given a speech about modern military challenges. Someone had asked about women in combat roles. Look, the transcript recorded him saying, "I'm not against women serving. My own daughter wears the uniform. But there's a difference between serving and leading in combat. When bullets fly, when lives are on the line, you need someone with the physical and mental fortitude that millions of years of evolution designed into men. It's not sexism, it's biology. My daughter does important work in logistics. Support roles. That's where women excel in supporting the warriors, not trying to be them." The audience had applauded. 3 months after that speech, I'd been shot in the shoulder pulling a wounded Marine out of an ambush. The Marine's name was Anthony Wheeler, Senator Wheeler's nephew. Another Wheeler saved by the unnecessary detail. I'd printed everything, every email, every transcript, every buried report. They sat in a locked drawer in my apartment, waiting. I could have released them, gone to the press, destroyed the careful mythology Dad had built around our family name. But that would have been expected, emotional, feminine. Instead, I planned something better, something that would force him to see me, really see me in front of everyone whose opinion he valued. The recognition he'd withdrawn would be delivered in person by the very men he'd convinced to forget my name. My phone buzzed. A text from Major Keller, Iron Tide unit in position. "Waiting for your signal." I looked around at the dinner table. Mom was laughing at something Ryan's girlfriend had said. Dad was pouring another bourbon, holding court with his old military buddies. Ryan was flexing unconsciously as he talked, the way he always did when he felt important. None of them knew that outside. 8 men who'd bled in Afghan dirt were waiting to set the record straight. None of them knew that every lie they'd told was about to be exposed by the truth in dress uniform. I typed back, 5 minutes. My father had taught me about tactical patience, about waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He'd taught me that battles weren't won by the strongest, but by the smartest. He'd been right about that, at least. The irony was perfect. I'd learned everything I needed to destroy his careful construction of reality from the very man who'd built it. The student had become the master, and class was about to be in session. The Mitchell Beach House had a wraparound porch that faced the Atlantic, and that's where I found myself at 2:30 3 weeks ago, unable to sleep after another family dinner. The ocean was black glass, reflecting nothing, swallowing everything. Ryan and his SEAL buddies were still inside, their laughter punctuating the night like artillery fire. They'd been telling war stories Ryan's all secondhand, stolen from Dad's experiences or Hollywood movies, but delivered with the conviction of someone who'd lived them. The thing about combat, I'd heard Ryan say, his voice carrying through the French doors, is that it reveals who you really are. No hiding behind politics or paperwork, just raw truth. Raw truth. From a man who'd cried during paintball. I was nursing a beer, still in my ACUs from the base, when footsteps creaked on the deck behind me. Coleman, Dad's old swim buddy from Team 4, dropped into the chair beside me, uninvited. "You know," he said, lighting a cigar despite the wind, "your old man talks about you sometimes. I'm sure he does. Says you're doing good work, important work, logistics, right?" Something like that. Coleman chuckled, the sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "That's what I love about you, sweetheart. Always so mysterious. Classified this. Need to know that? Playing spy games while real operators do the heavy lifting." My beer bottle was sweating in my hand. I focused on that sensation, the cold glass against my palm, instead of the urge to show Coleman exactly what kind of heavy lifting I could do with his windpipe. "Tell me," he continued, blowing smoke toward the ocean. "What's your unit designation, can you even say? Or is that classified too?" I could have lied, could have given him something generic, safe. Instead, I told the truth, knowing he wouldn't believe it. Joint Special Operations Command, Task Force Iron. Coleman nearly choked on his cigar smoke, then burst out laughing. "JSOC, you!" He slapped his knee like I'd told the best joke he'd heard all year. "Sweetheart, JSOC doesn't even officially exist, and if it did, they sure as hell wouldn't have— come on. Wouldn't have what?" My voice was steady as a sniper's breath. "You know what I mean. JSOC is Tier 1 stuff. Delta. DevGru. The absolute tip of the spear. They don't do diversity hires." Diversity hire? I'd been called worse, but something about the casual dismissal, the absolute certainty that I couldn't possibly be what I said I was, made my teeth ache. "Hey, Coleman!" Ryan's voice boomed from inside. "Get in here. We're about to show the security footage from my gym. Some guy tried to bench 350 and dropped it on himself. Funniest shit you've ever seen." Coleman stood, still chuckling. "JSOC. That's good, sweetheart. Really good. Your dad always said you had an imagination." He left me alone with the ocean and my rage. The next morning, I'd cornered Ryan in his home gym, watching him struggle through pull-ups with questionable form. "You know," I said, leaning against his squat rack, "Dad ever tell you about Operation Iron Tide?" Ryan dropped from the bar, reaching for his protein shake. "The rescue thing? Yeah, something about SEALs saving some guys in Afghanistan. Why?" "Just curious. He ever mention who led it? Probably some Team 6 badass. Dad knows all those guys." Ryan flexed in the mirror, admiring his pump. "That's what real warriors do, they save people. Not like the support staff who just what?" He turned to me with that patronizing smile I'd seen 1,000 times. "Look, Ava, I know you want to be part of it all, the real action, but someone has to do the paperwork. Right. Someone has to make sure the real heroes have what they need. That's important too. In its way." "In its way," I repeated. "Exactly. Everyone can't be the tip of the spear. Some people have to be the shaft." He laughed at his own metaphor. "You do your part. I do mine with the training center. preparing the next generation of warriors. We all contribute. I watched him load more weight onto the bar, far more than he could handle safely. His ego writing checks his muscles couldn't cash. "Spot me," he asked. I could have. Could have stood there and helped him with his vanity lifts, played the supportive sister one more time. Instead, I walked away. "Where are you going?" he called after me. "To do paperwork," I said. "Someone has to support the real warriors, right?" That night, I'd made the call to Major Keller, told him about the upcoming celebration for Ryan's training center, about the media that would be there, about the opportunity to set things right. "You sure about this, Captain?" he'd asked. "Once we do this, there's no taking it back." "Sir, they've been laughing at the uniform for years. They've been laughing at me. But worse, they've been stealing the truth from 8 men who deserve to have their story told correctly. This isn't about revenge." I'd thought about that for a long moment, watching the moon rise over the Atlantic. "No, sir. It's about recognition, the kind that can't be withdrawn." Now, sitting at this dinner table, listening to them laugh at their own ignorance, I felt the weight of what was coming. Not guilt, never guilt, but the solemn certainty of justice about to be served. Coleman was telling another story about real operators when I stood up. "Bathroom," I said when Mom looked at me questioningly, but I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to the front door, opened it, and stood there in my dress blues, waiting. The rumble of engines was louder now, close enough that even the drunk dinner guests would hear it soon, close enough that Ryan's stories would have to stop. I pulled out my phone and typed the message I'd been composing in my head for 3 years. "Now." Then I walked back to the dining room, retook my seat, and waited for the sound of combat boots on marble stairs. The uniform wasn't a costume, and everyone was about to learn what it really meant. The grand ballroom of the Clearwater Country Club had been transformed into a shrine to Ryan's ego. Banner after banner proclaimed, "Mitchell Warrior Fitness Center, forging tomorrow's heroes." The local news crew was setting up in the corner, their cameras capturing the who's who of coastal North Carolina society. 1 month had passed since that dinner. 1 month of planning, coordinating, ensuring every detail was perfect. I stood near the back wall in my dress blues, invisible despite the uniform. The hierarchies of small-town wealth our rigid military daughters rank somewhere between the catering staff and the potted plants. "Ladies and gentlemen." Dad's voice boomed through the microphone. He stood at the podium like he was addressing Congress, his navy dress whites immaculate despite being retired for a decade. "Tonight, we celebrate not just a business venture, but a continuation of the Mitchell family legacy of strength, honor, and warrior spirit." Applause rippled through the crowd of 200, local politicians, business owners, veterans from Dad's old unit, and enough reporters to ensure this would make tomorrow's front page. Ryan took the stage, wearing tactical pants and a too-tight polo with his gym's logo. He'd practiced this speech for weeks. I knew. Mom had told me during one of her weekly calls that I barely listened to. "You know," Ryan began, his voice trying for gravitas. "People ask me why I opened this training center, why I felt called to forge warriors." He paused for effect. "It's because I come from warriors. My father a decorated Navy SEAL, his father a Marine at Iwo Jima. And that warrior blood runs through my veins." I checked my phone. 8:50 p.m., 10 minutes. "But it's not just about the past," Ryan continued, warming to his theme. "It's about the future, about taking what my family taught me about strength, about courage, about what it means to be a real fighter, and passing it on." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Hooah!" Ryan beamed. "You see?" he said, gesturing to the promotional video playing behind him, footage of him leading CrossFit classes to overweight accountants. "Real warriors aren't just born, they're forged. And here at Mitchell Warrior Fitness, we separate the weak from the strong, the paper pushers from the operators." Paper pushers. I felt my jaw clench. "Speaking of family," Ryan continued, and I knew what was coming. "My sister is here tonight. Ava, stand up." The spotlight found me before I could refuse. I stood slowly, the light turning my ribbons into small mirrors. "My little sister here wears the uniform too," Ryan said, his tone patronizing enough to curdle milk. "She does. What is it again?" "Ava Logistics. Operations," I said, my voice carrying despite no microphone. "Right. Operations. Paperwork operations." The crowd chuckled. Ryan was on a roll now. "See, that's what I mean about different kinds of service. Some people are built for the front lines, and some people, well, some people make sure the warriors have enough printer paper. Everyone contributes. Right, Captain Clipboard. Captain Clipboard. He'd used it. In front of everyone. On camera." The laughter was louder this time. Dad was smiling that proud father smile he reserved for Ryan's moments. Mom was taking photos. Coleman and the other SEALs were nodding appreciatively at Ryan's wisdom. I sat back down, checking my phone. 8:55. "But tonight isn't about the paper pushers," Ryan continued, riding the wave of laughter. "It's about the real warriors. The ones who..." The double doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Not dramatically, not with a bang. Just opened. Quiet and professional. The way operators move when they mean business. 8 men entered in perfect formation, their dress uniforms sharp enough to cut glass. Combat infantry badges, silver stars, purple hearts, enough hardware to outfit a military museum. They moved through the crowd like sharks through water, people instinctively stepping aside. The room fell silent. Ryan's mouth hung open mid-sentence. Who?" Major William Keller took point, his green beret sitting at the exact regulation angle, his silver star catching the light. Behind him, Staff Sergeant Martinez, Sergeant First Class Thompson, Chief Petty Officer Brooks, and 4 others, Iron Tide Unit. The ghosts of Afghanistan made flesh. They walked straight down the center aisle, their footsteps synchronized, echoing in the silence. The news cameras swiveled, sensing a story. The red recording lights blinked on. "Excuse me," Ryan said into the microphone, his voice cracking slightly. "This is a private event. I don't know who you..." "Ryan Mitchell." Major Keller's voice didn't need a microphone. It filled the room like thunder. "Yes, son of Robert Mitchell. Yes, but we're here to correct a mistake." Dad stood up from his table, his face flushing red. "Major, I don't know what this is about, but Commander Mitchell..." Keller turned to him, offering a crisp salute that Dad, by reflex, returned. "We know exactly who you are. We also know who your daughter is." Every head in the room turned to look at me. I remained seated, hands folded on the table, expression neutral. 3 years ago, Keller continued, now addressing the room. 8 American servicemen were trapped behind enemy lines in the Korengal Valley, surrounded, outnumbered, out of ammunition. Command considered us lost. Acceptable casualties. The room was so quiet I could hear the news camera's autofocus whirring. One person disagreed. One officer volunteered to fly a single helicopter through an active firefight, land in a hot zone, and extract us. That officer took a bullet through the shoulder and kept flying. That officer killed 7 enemy combatants in hand-to-hand combat when they tried to breach our position. That officer saved every single one of us. Keller turned to look directly at Ryan. That officer wasn't a warrior forged in a gym. Wasn't someone who talks about combat at country club dinners. That officer was... He paused, his timing perfect. Captain Ava Mitchell, codename Iron One. The silence was deafening. Ryan's face had gone pale. The microphone fell from his hand, creating a feedback shriek that nobody moved to stop. Keller continued, his voice steady as a drumbeat. "We're here tonight to present Captain Mitchell with something that should have been presented 3 years ago. Something that was withdrawn for reasons we've recently come to understand." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a folder. Dad's face had gone from red to white. "Major, this isn't the time or place. On the contrary, Commander, this is exactly the time and place, in front of family, In front of community. In front of cameras. The way it should have been. The news crews were pushing closer now, sensing blood in the water. I stood slowly, straightening my uniform, and walked toward my unit. Each step I took across that ballroom floor echoed like a gunshot. 200 pairs of eyes tracked my movement, but I only felt 8, the 8 men whose lives had intersected with mine in Afghan hell. Major Keller opened the folder as I approached. Inside, I could see the glint of metal and official seals. My heartbeat remained steady, controlled. Combat had taught me that. Captain Ava Mitchell. Keller's voice carried to every corner of the room. 3 years ago, you flew your MH-60 Blackhawk through active RPG fire to reach our position. When your helicopter took damage, you performed an emergency landing under fire. When enemy forces surrounded us, you established a defensive perimeter and held it for 4 hours until extraction arrived. He pulled out the first document. During that time, you sustained a gunshot wound to the left shoulder, which you field-dressed yourself while continuing to provide covering fire. You administered emergency medical aid to Staff Sergeant Martinez, saving his life. You carried Chief Brooks 200 meters to the extraction point when he couldn't walk. Martinez stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. She told me I wasn't allowed to die on her watch, said she'd already filled out too much paperwork that day. His attempt at humor cracked, tears visible on his weathered face. I have 3 kids who still have a father because of this woman. The news cameras were rolling, catching every word. I saw Dad's hands clench on the table, his knuckles white. The official report, Keller continued, pulling out another paper, was classified, then modified, then buried. The rescue was attributed to coalition forces and tactical support elements. Captain Mitchell's name was removed from all documentation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ryan had collapsed into a chair, his face the color of old paper. "We didn't know," Thompson spoke up, his Boston accent cutting through the room. "For 2 years, we didn't know who flew that bird. They told us it was classified. Need to know. Then, 6 weeks ago, we found out the truth." Brooks, still limping from injuries that never fully healed, stepped forward. "We found out that the officer who saved us had been erased from her own story, that her own father," he looked directly at Robert Mitchell, "had signed the recommendation for her Silver Star, then withdrew it. Because having a daughter as a war hero didn't fit the family narrative." Mom's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. The sound seemed to break something loose in the room. Whispers erupted like fire through dry grass. "Commander Mitchell," Keller's voice cut through the noise. "Would you like to explain to this room, to these cameras, why you withdrew your daughter's commendation?" Dad stood slowly, his dress whites suddenly looking like a costume on an actor who'd forgotten his lines. This is a family matter. It doesn't belong." 8 lives. Keller interrupted. 8 American servicemen breathing today because your daughter did what you trained your whole life to do, but never actually accomplished a single-handed rescue under fire. And you buried it because she's a woman. You don't understand. Dad's voice cracked. The politics, the implications. I understand perfectly. It was my voice now, steady and clear. I hadn't planned to speak yet, but the words came anyway. You couldn't stand that your daughter outranked your son in the only currency you value, combat heroism. You couldn't bear that a Mitchell woman had done what Mitchell men only talked about. I turned to face the room, the cameras, my community. Every story Ryan told tonight about warrior spirit, I've lived it. Every weight he's lifted in his air-conditioned gym, I've carried that weight in wounded soldiers through enemy fire. Every client he's trained to be a warrior, I've been one. Ryan tried to stand, his legs shaking. Ava, I didn't know. Dad said you did logistics. Dad lied. The words hung in the air like a blade. And you were happy to believe it because it made you feel bigger to make me smaller. I turned back to Keller, who held out the Bronze Star, the Silver Star, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. Captain Mitchell, on behalf of the United States Army and the 8 men whose lives you saved, It's my honor to present these long overdue commendations. As he pinned each medal to my uniform, the room erupted. Camera flashes exploded like artillery. Reporters shouted questions. Someone started clapping, then another, until the applause became thunder. But in that noise, I heard only silence from 3 people. Mom, sitting frozen at her table, her perfect world shattered like her champagne glass. Ryan, his warrior fitness empire revealed as a costume party where the only real warrior had been mocked as a paper pusher. And Dad, whose decades of careful mythology had just been demolished by 8 men with the truth and a daughter with patience. Keller leaned close as he pinned the last medal. We would have come sooner if we'd known. Captain, Iron Tide never forgets. You came at exactly the right time, I said, loud enough for the nearest camera to pick up. Some lessons are best learned in public. The Charlotte Observer reporter pushed forward. Her microphone extended. Captain Mitchell, how does it feel to finally receive recognition? I looked at her, then at my family, then back at the camera. You all laughed at the uniform, I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. Called me Captain Clipboard, paper pusher. Said I played soldier while real warriors did the work. I touched the silver star on my chest, its weight familiar and right. But this uniform carried your pride home in pieces. This uniform bled so others could live. This uniform represents everything you claimed to value but couldn't recognize when it didn't match your prejudice. I turned to Ryan, who looked like he might vomit on his tactical pants. Your Warrior Fitness Center. You're teaching people to be something you've never been, something you mocked when it stood right in front of you. Finally, I faced Dad. And you, Commander Mitchell. You taught me everything about honor, courage, and commitment. The shame is that you never expected me to actually live it. The room held its breath, waiting. I straightened my uniform, nodded to my unit, and began walking toward the exit. Captain Mitchell. The reporter called. Where are you going? I paused at the door, looking back one last time. To do my job, the one I've been doing all along while they were laughing. The parking lot was still full of expensive cars when Dad found me. I was leaning against my rental, watching the moon rise over the Atlantic, still in my dress blues with the new medals catching the security lights. The sound of his dress shoes on asphalt was hesitant, nothing like the confident stride I'd grown up trying to match. Ava. I didn't turn around. Commander. Don't. His voice cracked on the word. Just don't. Silence stretched between us, filled with the distant sound of waves and the muffled chaos still erupting from the country club behind us. Through the windows, I could see camera crews interviewing guests, my unit still surrounded by reporters. I thought keeping quiet would protect you, he finally said. I turned then, studying the man who'd been my hero before he became my betrayer. He looked older than his 62 years, shoulders bent under invisible weight. No, Dad, you thought keeping quiet would protect your image, Ryan's image, the Mitchell family mythology you've spent decades building. That's not 3 years, I interrupted. 3 years you knew. You wrote my commendation yourself, called me exceptional, brilliant, a hero. Then you withdrew it because a hero daughter didn't fit your narrative of Mitchell men and the women who support them. His hands shook as he reached into his jacket, pulling out a flask I didn't know he carried. The bourbon smell mixed with sea salt as he took a long pull. You don't understand what it was like, he said. My generation, my teams, women they were different, separate. There were rules, expectations, prejudices, traditions, he countered, but the word came out weak. When you joined, I thought you'd wash out. When you didn't, I thought you'd take a support role. When you went combat arms, you thought I'd fail. Yes, the admission hung between us like a blade. I thought you'd fail, and when you didn't, I didn't know how to reconcile it. My daughter doing things I'd only seen the best men do, better than the best men. Better than you. His silence was answer enough. The operation you ran, he continued, voice barely above a whisper. Iron Tide. 8 men extracted from certain death. Single pilot, no backup, under heavy fire. In my 20 years of service, I never did anything that brave, that insane, that brilliant. So you buried it. I was protecting your ego. The words exploded from me, months of rage finally breaking free. You were protecting your precious ego because you couldn't stand that your daughter, your property, your little girl, your disappointment had exceeded you in every way you claimed to value. A figure appeared in the doorway behind us. Ryan, his swagger gone, replaced by something hollow. He approached slowly, like a man walking to his execution. I didn't know, he said quietly, about any of it. The operation, the medals, what you really did. Dad always said what you wanted to hear. I cut him off. That you were the warrior, that you carried the family legacy, that I was just playing dress-up. Ryan's face crumbled. I mocked you, in front of everyone, called you Captain Clipboard. Yes, while you were. Christ, Ava, you were saving lives, flying into hell, and I was teaching suburban dads how to do burpees. The 3 of us stood there in the parking lot, the Mitchell family triangle finally collapsing under the weight of truth. Inside the country club, I could see Mom through the window, surrounded by her society friends, all of them talking rapidly, gesturing, their perfect world reorganizing around this new scandal. What happens now? Dad asked, looking every inch the defeated commander he was. The media, the attention, this will destroy your reputation. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. Your carefully crafted image as the perfect military family good. Ava, you made me a ghost in my own story. You let Ryan build an empire on stolen valor while I bled in Afghanistan. You chose your prejudice over your daughter, your image over the truth. I pulled my car keys from my pocket, the metal cold against my palm. I didn't want revenge, I said, looking at both of them. I wanted recognition, the kind you couldn't withdraw, couldn't bury, couldn't rewrite. Tonight, I got it. We're still family, Ryan said desperately. We can work through this. No. The word was final as a judge's gavel. We're blood, but family doesn't erase you. Family doesn't mock your service while stealing your valor. Family doesn't choose comfort over truth. Dad stepped forward, his hand reaching out, then falling to his side. What you did. Iron Tide. Don't. I opened my car door. Don't you dare say you're proud now. Pride isn't something you feel when the cameras are rolling and you have no choice. Pride is what you show when no one's watching, when it costs you something, when it challenges your assumptions. Where will you go? Dad asked. Forward. The same direction I've been going while you all stood still. Ryan's voice cracked. Ava, please, let me apologize properly. You want to apologize. Close your gym. Stop pretending to be something you're not. Stop teaching warrior spirit when you don't even know what it means. That's my life, my business, built on a lie, my lie, the one Dad created and you perpetuated. I started the engine. You want to be a warrior. Ryan, start by having the courage to admit you're not one. I began backing out, but Dad stepped forward one more time. The silence, he said urgently. It wasn't protection. You're right. It was fear. Fear that my daughter was everything I'd claimed women couldn't be. I stopped the car, window down, looking at the man who taught me to shoot, to fight, to never give up everything except how to be seen. I know, I said quietly. I've always known. Then I drove away, leaving them in the parking lot with their shattered mythology and the echo of truth still ringing from the ballroom behind them. In my rearview mirror, I saw Dad put his arm around Ryan's shoulders, not in comfort, but like he needed support to stand. The silence was finally broken. And I was done carrying it. The ballroom had transformed into a media circus by the time everything ended. Reporters from 3 states had descended, their cameras capturing every moment of the Mitchell family reckoning. Ryan's promotional banners for his Warrior Fitness Center now seemed like props in a tragedy, hanging over a scene they were never meant to witness. I stood near the exit, watching Dad take the podium one more time. His dress whites no longer looked crisp, they hung on him like a costume he'd outgrown. The crowd fell silent, even the reporters sensing this was the real story. I stand before you tonight. His voice carried across the room, aged 10 years and 10 minutes. To correct a record I helped destroy. The words came slowly, each one seemingly pulled from some deep place he'd locked away. The bravest soldier in the Mitchell family isn't the one who shouts loudest about warrior spirit. It isn't the one with the gym or the stories or the masculine bravado. He looked directly at Ryan, who stood frozen by the wall. It's the one who flew through hell to save 8 Americans. The one I erased from the story because she didn't fit my outdated image of what a warrior should look like. He turned to where I stood, our eyes meeting across the crowded room. Captain Ava Mitchell, my daughter, is everything I claimed to value but was too blinded by prejudice to see. She didn't just serve, she excelled. She didn't just participate, she led. She didn't just wear the uniform, she honored it in ways I never did. The silence was absolute. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, afraid to break whatever spell had fallen. I withdrew her commendation 3 years ago, Dad continued, his voice cracking, not to protect her, as I've claimed, but to protect my own ego. My son built a business on the warrior mythology I created, while my daughter, the actual warrior, served in silence. He gripped the podium, knuckles white. To the 8 men of Iron Tide Unit, thank you for having the courage I lacked, for recognizing the hero I refused to see, for breaking the silence I enforced. Major Keller stepped forward, offering Dad a slow salute not required between retired and active service members, but meaningful nonetheless. Dad returned it with shaking hands. Captain Mitchell, Dad said, still looking at me. You've earned what we should have given long ago. Not just these medals, but respect, recognition, truth. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there in my dress blues, the weight of 3 new medals on my chest, watching the man who'd taught me everything except how to be valued for who I was. Ryan finally found his voice, stepping toward the microphone. I'm closing the gym, effective immediately. I've been teaching something I don't understand, claiming a legacy I didn't earn. The only warrior in the Mitchell family is the one I mocked for wearing costumes. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Ava. Not just for tonight, but for every joke, every dismissal, every time I made myself bigger by making you smaller. The crowd began to stir, whispers rising like tide. Reporters pushed forward with questions, but I was already moving, not running. I was done running, just walking with purpose toward the door, my unit falling into formation behind me. Captain Mitchell. A reporter called. One question, what's next for you? I paused at the threshold, looking back one final time at the wreckage of carefully constructed lies. The same thing as always, I said. My duty, with or without their recognition. The night air hit me like freedom itself. Behind me, I could hear Dad still talking, answering questions, dismantling decades of mythology with each word. The Iron Tide Unit stood around me. These 8 men who'd traveled across the country to set a record straight. Thank you, I said simply. No, Captain. Keller replied. Thank you for saving us twice once in Afghanistan, and again from living with a lie. They saluted as one, crisp and perfect. I returned it, then watched as they headed to their vehicles. Tomorrow, they'd return to their lives, their families, their own battles. But tonight, they'd given me something I'd never thought I'd have witnesses to my truth. I walked to my car, past the news vans and the gathering crowd of onlookers. My phone buzzed with messages fellow officers who'd seen the broadcast, friends from the service, even a text from my commanding officer, about damn time Iron won. As I drove away from the country club, away from Clearwater, away from the Mitchell family mythology, I thought about silence, how it could be a weapon or a prison, depending on who controlled it. For 3 years, their silence had imprisoned me. Tonight, my breaking of it had set me free. The highway stretched ahead, dark and endless. Somewhere behind me, the Mitchell family name was being rewritten in real time, the truth finally overtaking the fiction. Ryan would close his gym and have to figure out who he was without his false warrior identity. Mom would face her society friends with a new reality. And Dad would have to live with the knowledge that his daughter had surpassed him in every way he'd taught her to measure worth. I touched the silver star on my chest, feeling its weight, its reality, not withdrawn, not buried, not silenced. The uniform wasn't a costume. It never had been. It was armor, and it had protected me long enough to survive their diminishment, their erasure, their mockery, long enough to wait for the perfect moment to show them who I really was. In the rearview mirror, I could still see the lights of the country club, probably full of reporters and gossip and the spectacular collapse of a carefully constructed lie. But ahead was only darkness and possibility, the road unwinding toward whatever came next. I'd been flying through fire my entire life. The only difference now was that everyone could finally see the light. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with listeners from different corners of the globe. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Ava's journey. What would you have done in her position? Let's discuss in the comments.